Yeah.
An automatic.
What was the next excuse, man?
Yeah.
Shades there.
The film since.
Well, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. But there's a greater impact.
15, I guess.
I always come back to this.
Yeah, like that. I always.
This was in the sales call.
Funny,
Like
man.
that's what I do. Like
Guys, welcome to another episode of the Agency Podcast. Today we thought we would do something a little different. Joining me on the couch today is Cam Nugent, who is our media coordinator and producer behind the scenes here for the podcast. And also behind camera, we do have Cabe. And Cabe is going to be chiming in potentially on his microphone. But there we go. We wanted to, celebrate the fact that it's our 50th episode, and the team thought it would be a cool idea to interview myself. I don't know what's on the script. Cam's got an idea what he wants to talk about.
Got a couple of questions ready to fire away, and a few that we normally ask the guests, but we've changed them to be a bit more reflective today. So it's going to be a bit of fun. I think something we haven't done before, and something I haven't really been seeing done in the podcasting space is kind of get the team involved in a celebratory episode.
Let's dive in, man.
Let's dive in. Dain, first and foremost, what inspired you to start the podcast?
Great question. I think it was, we had a couple of false starts. I initially started a podcast back in 2020, towards the end of 2020, 2021, and I was just doing it on Zoom. And it was a great excuse to get people I admired into a conversation with me for an hour. And there was really no intention behind it other than just like meeting cool people, having great conversation, and just genuinely trying to be curious and trying to learn. And I filmed, I think 5 or 6 episodes myself. So it was just like I logged into Zoom, the guest logged in, we filmed for an hour and a half, and then I would download the video and then upload that thing. So that was kind of, I guess, the first somewhat false start, but it was fun. I think what happened after that was the business just really started to take off. RIVYL at that time was 6 people, and we were all working from home. And it was like 18, 19-hour days, 6-7 days a week for 2 years after that. So it the podcast became something I really wanted to tackle. But I just couldn't justify adding it to my plate when I had a newborn baby, and the circumstances of the business was it was just draining a lot of time, and I think it was like something I knew I was going to come back to. Then in conversation with Cam, so Cam, you joined the team 2.5 years ago.
Yep.
And Cam was expressing to me, because we both love podcasts, we both listen to them all the time, we refer each other to listen to different episodes, and I kind of threw the idea out like, oh, I'd like to do a podcast. But it was really you, Cam, that I guess pushed me to go, we need to actually do this. And you took onus and responsibility together with Cabe to like set up the equipment, set up the studio. We bought microphones and mixers and everything. And I guess to throw a question back to you, man, like what was your experience around that period where we decided that we would kick it off again?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think for me, podcasting is such a cool mechanism or media platform for having conversations with very interesting people, talking about ideas, whether it be entertaining or value-driven or however you may like it to be. But I think for me, the opportunity for you to have cool conversations with cool people was something that really drew me to the opportunity to do it for the agency and for yourself. And then I think Cabe can chirp in here. I think we all grossly underestimated how much work would be involved in a podcast.
Radically underestimated it.
Definitely.
Yeah, it was. I think each week we went, fuck, this is a lot more work than we thought this would be. We thought we could just, chuck a couple of cameras in a room, wing it, and talk shit. I mean, even if you watch the first episode of the podcast, like Tiger Table, it's very different to what it is now. Very
different. So you can't see on the cameras here, but we were in the corner of the room up against the wall. we branded the Tiger Table because the mascot for RIVYL is a tiger. And I just had this quirky idea for the name of the podcast. And if we built a little brand around it, we launched it. We had orange couches. You can go back and see it. But it just felt odd. I think we were kind of experimenting. We were trying to do an in-house podcast together with the team. However, it's quite stressful because we have a high-performance team, a lot of clients, a lot of projects. Pulling a group of people off projects to sit down for a pod seemed to get in the way of the flow of the workplace. So we kind of decided, okay, well, we've played with the couch cast setting. Let's try and do an interview-esque podcast.
I think that really comes back to the idea that you preach in your keynotes a lot about testing different content format types and styles. Like we were kind of doing that for the podcast, and like we tried that kind of game show approach where everyone would come prepared with topics, everyone would talk about certain topics, or we'd interview entrepreneurs around their business, or we would do the sort of Joe Rogan approach where we would have KBRI in the back end pulling up examples on a TV and people would be speaking to that. So we tried a lot of different formats, and I think it wasn't until we all agreed that at its core the podcast is Dain, and Dain is the constant thread throughout the whole podcast, whether that be we traveling for a keynote or doing something else. Dain would be the point of consistency throughout the whole show. So we thought instead of it being the Tiger Table, which is theoretically an extension of the RIVYL branding, let's change that and make it an extension of Dain's brand, which is now called the Agency Podcast.
Yeah, well, I think it was a lot with like realigning the goals. At the start, we were definitely testing the Tiger Table. It wasn't properly vetted at all. We kind of just wanted to see where it would go. After we realized what did better and what was working and just what people would rather see, that's when it all aligned into the agency.
And you guys raise a good point here, and we have a theory here in RIVYL behind the scenes that we call mud mapping it. And mud mapping it means, I guess when you have an idea on how something should look and feel and sound and operate, that you want to, I guess, leapfrog straight to the Google GPS format. Everything's squared away, everything's organized and perfect. But seldomly does an idea start perfect. And, we've learned this through the creation process of building brands, and whether it's designing a logo or building a website, usually the initial idea isn't able to flesh itself out until you execute it or deploy it in the market. But to mud map something for ourselves means just get out a napkin and a crayon and just figure it out. And I think that was our approach to the Tiger Table, was cameras, lights, couch, guests.
How hard can it be?
Yeah, let's just go for it.
Yeah.
And, I'm always preaching this to our clients and our audience is just be willing to be a mad scientist. And, if you're so scared of people judging you, well, what is it? 15 or 20 people are going to judge you? Let's be real. When you launch a podcast, you're not going to have 10, 20, 30,000 downloads.
Well, I mean, the clip you sent me this morning from Chris Williamson, he said he did, half a dozen episodes with literally 0 views.
Yeah.
And it's just an exercise in patience, really.
And to add on to that, I think it's sometimes hard for people to continuously go, even without any value given back from it. If you're not getting views, you're not getting likes, it is quite hard to keep on pushing forward, keep on investing time and money into something. So after the fruition, when it finally does start to pick up, you realize that, it takes time.
It does take time. And mud mapping it is all about throwing mud at the wall and seeing what sticks and then pivoting from there. And I think what happened was we learned, okay, we definitely want to do a podcast.
Yeah,
that's for sure. The name didn't quite feel right, and we decided to rebrand it to have a sleeker name. And we have a friend who I guess we can shout him out, Mark Gagnon, who works for the Flagrant podcast with Andrew Schultz. I befriended him a year and a half ago, and he's like, yeah, dude, just try to pick a one-namer. Use Dain Walker and just pick one name for the brand, and it's just going to be more searchable, better for SEO, better for branding purposes, yada, yada. And we're like, okay, cool, let's just take his word for it. So then we rebranded to the Agency Podcast, Dain Walker's Agency Podcast, and it just worked better because people were searching my name on YouTube. And yeah, I think we decided to change the format because we were obsessing over particular guests that we wanted to get. And I think the one-on-one format just felt different.
Feels more intimate, feels more genuine. And I think an interesting point that I would love to touch on is I think there was a lot of apprehension around starting at the start because just given how busy you are. And we kind of just went, I don't know if we can commit to the weekly schedule, but we've just made it work somehow. I don't know how.
Still very busy. But
Still very busy.
Yeah, we crammed it into the schedule.
Yeah, we were just like, if we're going to go out to public and say we're doing a weekly episode, 9:00 Friday every time, we have to fucking do it.
Yeah, we committed. And then hell or high water, rain, hail or shine, in sickness and in health, we were like, this is going out every Friday.
I mean, fuck, you've done episodes where you've been nearly dying, like coughing off camera, pausing takes while Dain coughs, like literally in sickness and health, Dain has done this podcast. So that's an absolute testament to your stubbornness, if we want to call it that, to just get it done,
man. I think it's just
to get it done.
Stupidity and stupid brawn stubbornness.
I think it very much falls under the camp that you always preach is just say yes, figure it out later. It's literally this podcast, and here we are 50 episodes deep, and we're like, well, we're going to go to 100 now. So
yeah. And just to crawl into your mind for a moment, Cam, like when and I guess back to you, Cabe, like when we transitioned from Tiger Table to agency, what were the things you were excited about and what were the things you were concerned about?
Do you want to go first, mate?
The visuals. I thought the visuals were much better going into the agency. It made a lot more sense with actually just aligning. We want to interview people taking agency in their life. It gave us a purpose to go forward, whereas the Tiger Table, it had a purpose behind the scenes, but it was very hard to actually see that.
Yeah, like from a branding perspective, it wasn't super clear. And I think when we were discussing internally, like what did we want the theme to be, I was kind of anti-biographical pod. I just knew I knew what I didn't want. And I was like, I didn't want to be another tell me a story podcast. And, no offense to people that do that. There's some beautiful people that make fantastic podcasts that are biographical by nature, and I listen to them. But I was like, I just didn't want to take the same approach. I was like, I really wanted to get tactical with the guests, and I really wanted to try to pinpoint and get guests that could sit and like unload how you could go do something and to better understand their psychology, what makes them tick, and what's their molecular makeup that makes them so fantastic at what they do. And then can we transfer that to you, the listener, so you can go, that's cool. I'm going to go try that for myself. And I think that, that was the format we kind of figured out we wanted to test. And then we invested in reconfiguring the set and the layout.
Equipment.
And we invested money again, and it just worked. It just
feels
felt
right
different
now.
Yeah,
I feel like this is we're still figuring out some aspects to the pod, but at its core, this feels the way we've always wanted it to be, and we've talked about it.
It's always evolving.
Yeah.
But to jump back, like, what were your fears, and what were the things that made you guys excited
Cam?
About the agency podcast.
about the change? Yeah, from Tiger Table to agency.
I was more excited about the change to the agency podcast because it enabled you to have workshop conversations with entrepreneurs that you might not typically. Like if we were to do the Christo episode that we did in agency pod around the 20th episode, and we were to do that with the Tiger Table format, I don't think it wouldn't have worked.
No.
Lewis Howes wouldn't have worked. I think as we're traveling, because as we'll say, Dain's about to do a keynote with Gary Vee, and that's an incredible feat in its own right. But if we potentially can work our magic there, I don't think the Tiger Table format will work when Dain's traveling with keynotes, because it's just a completely different beast.
Yeah, I guess we wanted something more nimble for travel.
Correct.
Because now we're doing keynotes once or twice a month. We're traveling, Germany, USA, Europe. We're just invited to Romania, and we're like, okay, cool. Like, who do we know in these places? So that it's quite easy to take this format on the road, hire a studio with 2 couches, hire some microphones, and just let it rip.
Yeah, look, I think it's a lot more jarring if you have 4 people on a couch and it turns into 2, rather than just one person that's always there and the guest changes.
Yeah, like we wanted continuity.
Exactly.
Consistency.
And the continuity doesn't have to be the set. It can be just the vibe of the
I mean,
overall podcast.
we've said no to some incredible guests just because they wanted to do a 2-on-1 interview, and we're like, that's not this podcast. And if that's just not who we are as a podcast now. We want the intimate, private conversations, the unpacking of the psychology, the molecular structure, to your point earlier, of them as an individual. And I think when there's more than two people in a conversation, the dynamic's completely different.
Especially when you're talking about like high level academic things and trying to bring them down to a very easily, casually viewable concept.
Yeah, I think there's some beauty in a conversation. I mean, like, where else in the world can you sit down with someone you admire for an intimate conversation you've never met, and there's a social contract that, like, I'm here to share deep knowledge with you and essentially expose things that might be personal or things that might be topics that they'd never talked about before, never unearthed before. And I think we've made a substantial effort, and we continue to make effort to try to go, how do we ask this person questions that have never been asked before? How do we make sure that there's like a sense of like interest for them on their part, so they're not just doing another biographical answer session, sharing their story.
I always say when we're onboarding them or doing a discovery call, when I'm doing a discovery call with them to screen them before the episode, I go, it's very much not a Tracy Grimshaw current affairs episode. We're not here to cover your story. Another podcast can do it. We're here to unpack you as an individual. And I want to touch on this topic quickly because I think it's really interesting.
Business owners, if you're stuck using one platform for every project, you're probably stuck in a growth bottleneck. More clients means more hires, which just adds noise and cuts into profits. To break the loop, you need flexible tools that don't stretch your resources. Wix Studio is a smart addition to your business toolkit. Intuitive by design, your team can quickly master the platform and focus on the work that matters the most. Then keep up the momentum with a built-in management tool, a unified dashboard, reusable assets, and a Figma plugin that turns static design into launch-ready websites. With robust native business solutions like bookings, e-commerce, and events, you can take any project at any scale without the added cost of third-party plugins. Plus, Wix Studio is a low-maintenance platform, meaning you can redirect the client budget towards real growth initiatives. Think more value for clients, steady income streams, and stronger relationships. To get started, simply go to wix.com/studio.
Who have been your favorite guests you've interviewed, and who were you the most nervous to interview, or people to interview?
Yeah, I think, you know, for me personally, they're kind of the same person. So when I started RIVYL, the agency, I remember distinctly driving home the night I decided I wanted to start a business. And I went on to YouTube and I just started looking up, you know, design and how to build an agency, and Christo popped up. I'd never seen him before. I was like, this guy's fascinating, deeply intellectual, incredibly clever and witty. And I went deep on his content. I like bought all of his courses, consumed his podcast, consumed his programs. And, you know, in many ways, I looked at Christo as kind of like somewhat of like an idol. I was like, this guy's got it figured out. I want to do what he does for a living. And he was modeling exactly what I wanted to build. So it was like serendipitous that I happened to stumble upon someone I could model that was enacting and building what I wanted to do the way I wanted to do it. I was inspired to start the business because of Gary Vee, but I think Christo very much acted as a model. So to answer your question, like, who was the guest that made me the most nervous and the guest that was my favorite personally, it was Christo. It was a meaningful moment for me because it was like a moment where I was like, cool, I'm meeting the person that inspired me to create this whole thing. And at the same time, incredibly nervous, like quaking on that episode.
Because you, for the Devour podcast, which is, if people don't know what that is, that was the podcast before the Tiger Table and the agency podcast. How did interviewing him then versus interviewing now for the agency podcast, how did that differ? And was the fear or the reservation the same?
I was probably equally terrified, if not more, in person. So the first time I interviewed Chris was when the podcast was called I guess, Devour podcast. I think Chris was the third or fourth guest. And I feel like back then it was interesting going back and watching that episode and watching the new episode in tandem, because you can tell clearly I have kind of no idea what I'm doing. I'm asking terrible questions. It's over Zoom, and Chris did a phenomenal job. He's a professional, but I just look at myself then. I'm like, man, I had no idea what I was doing. Like no style or charisma or quality of question, and I felt like I fumbled my way through it. But when you're sitting in front of a screen on Zoom, there's a certain degree of protection, or you get a little bit more security. But if you watch the first like 5 or 10 minutes of that episode, I'm like, I can barely talk. Like my throat is like struggling to ask questions. And I'm pretty sure I wore a button-up shirt to try and be professional. And like, it was
Very
just
out of character.
it was
Very out
super-
of character for you.
super me not being me. Like, but when I met him in LA, he was so lovely. He was so kind and generous. And I think, about 10 minutes into the episode in person in LA, you can see him and I shift gears and like really click into a good conversation. The nerves subsided toward the end of the podcast, but it was just, I didn't want to waste his time. I respect him massively. And I was like, just honestly, you can see on that episode, I'm just a little kid. I'm like, tell me more, man. Like, I'm just here to absorb everything you're saying.
Yeah.
Do you think you were more nervous the second time meeting him in person?
Definitely for the first like 10 or 20 minutes, especially when we were hanging out before we started filming. I was freaking out. I was like, I don't know what to do with my hands. I don't know like how to converse with this guy. I don't know how to be like not that awkward, annoying super fan.
Do you feel that it's possibly because you've had more success since then? Whereas, I guess because he is one of the inspirations for starting your business, when you first interviewed him, you would have had, 5 employees?
Yeah, when I first interviewed Chris, we had 5 or 6 employees at that time.
Yeah, so it's times by 4 the second time.
Yeah.
Within 4 years.
Yeah, it was interesting. There was a particular moment that we talked about, which was when Chris arrived, because we had to hire a studio in where was it? It was
LA.
Whereabouts in LA was it?
Oh, I can't remember off the top of the
Pasadena?
dome.
Pasadena.
Yes.
Yeah, so we were in
Yeah, well
Pasadena,
done.
LA. We hired a studio. It was a great studio. Shout out to those guys. We'll put their link in chat. And I distinctly remember Chris saying, "Oh, cool! Like, great to meet you, Dain, in person. Yada yada." And I was like, "Hey, here's Cam and here's Kay." He was like, "Nice to meet you guys." And he's like, "Where are you from?" And then we're like, "We're all from Australia." And he's like, "Oh, this is your crew." And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Damn! Like, you brought a crew with you." Like, there was a moment where he was like, "Respect."
Yeah.
And that kind of gave me the warm and fuzzies. And I was like, "Okay, cool." Like I'm jamming with my hero in many ways, and he's like giving me a tilt of respect. And he's like, "How's the team going?" And I was like, "Dude, we're almost at 30 people." And he's like, "What the hell? Like, what have you been doing?" And it was just really cool. I think when you're able to, I guess, have external validation from someone you really admire, it hits you 10x.
On that now, how has hosting a podcast changed your appreciation for podcasting in general?
Yeah, I think starting a podcast and taking it seriously was a game changer for me in a few aspects. I think you have to pay attention to detail. Like, every detail matters. It's almost like putting on a performance. And the layers of the detail are, okay, you got to get your equipment squared away. You got to make sure your microphones are working. You got to make sure the cameras have good lighting. You got to make sure they're in the right position. You got to make sure that everything's been recorded. You have backup SD cards, and you're able to get them on your drive so that things don't corrupt and all the rest of it. And it's like, okay, that's that set of details. But then it's like the conversation in and of itself. Like, have we written good questions? Did we research the guest effectively? Are we asking them questions that aren't going to pair well with how they like to jive on questions? Then it's also about making the guests feel comfortable. So in order to get a guest to feel comfortable on the podcast, there's a bunch of things that we do. And we've only figured this out by trial and error and asking other podcast hosts what they do and looking up things on the internet and trying to like really research and digest it. But what we learned was to make a guest feel comfortable, first we, have Cam introduce himself to them on a Zoom call. And he asked them a series of questions to vet out if they're kind of capable and comfortable and have a good sense of acumen to hold a conversation well. Once they get through the pre-screen, we organize a driver to pick them up. We organize their coffee. We get a snack or a beverage that we know that they love from the research we've done. When the guest arrives, we introduce them to the team. We take them around the office. We crack jokes. We warm them up. Then when they grab a seat, we jam out for 10 minutes just to get them using their vocals and to get them to feel comfortable and to get them kind of relax in the chair. Once the episode finishes, we hang out and then, we give them gifts and we thank them and tell them how much we appreciate their time. And third is like, how do we maximize the value we're giving the guest? How do we post an episode in a way that has a flow to it and is jam-packed with all the value? And then how do we edit ruthlessly so it's the best possible piece of entertainment that we can produce?
And that comes to Cabe's prowess in editing, because there's a lot of editing that needs to go into an episode.
Yeah.
Hours and days of editing.
And many mistakes on my part. So I think one that we had, which was when in conversation, I tend to go, cool.
Well, everyone does. You always do it at the pub, anywhere. You always go, I get that. And then you don't. Then Cabe will pull Dain up every episode and go, you did that X amount of times.
Yeah, there was one episode that Cabe had to edit. I think it was 286 years that he had to snip out of the episode.
Yeah, there's a lot of
There's
words.
Yeah.
Some words come through. Yeah, like these are words that I think just in English vocabulary, it's filler words. They're real words, not like and are, but they still are filler words. It's just hard. It's not natural to not use them in
Australians. I think
conversation.
we're just like I have to ask questions in an effective way that is understandable and easy to digest. And just some simple mistakes we made on the podcast early on was like, I'd ask loaded questions. I'd jam 8 questions into one paragraph and then go. Learn that doesn't work. So then we just had to really consistently refine things. It was like hitting the gym. Just every episode, we would immediately sit down with the team and they would scorecard me on what I did well and what I did poorly. And then they were ruthless. They're like, you said, 300 times. And you can't and ah, and you can't say, all the time. And it was just, it sounds horrible, but I was like loving it because it was just constant badgering on like, let's make it better 1% every episode at least.
On that about giving yourself advice, if you could go back and redo or give yourself advice for the first episode of the Tiger Table, what would you say to yourself as a host?
I would say to myself, if I were to go back in time and start again, I would tell myself, make sure you research the guest. It makes a tremendous improvement over the quality of the episode. It might not sound like it. You might go, I don't have time, but like just trying to get into the vibration or the frequency or the energy of your guest can really substantially increase how comfortable you are and the way you frame questions.
And that's not just the personality, or not just their history, I guess.
No, not just the history. Like I'll go back to a guest and I'll look at like, how do they answer questions? How do they speak? What questions did they respond to well on previous podcasts? What questions can I tell that they were irritated by? How comfortable were they? What were the topics that they leaned into the most, and what topics might they feel uncomfortable answering? Just whatever I could find. I was just trying to get insights on how the guest thinks and operates and communicates. Because if you look at not just the way they answer questions, but like how their body language looks and how they approach things. Are they approaching things analytically and factually, or are they approaching things with storytelling, or are they approaching things with metaphors and parables and insights? Like, for example, Chris Do is really good at referencing material that he's consumed or read. He'll give you facts and evidence and a story and a metaphor all in one beautifully. But then we've had other guests that are more story-based, like Bedros Keuilian, and then more other guests that are more conversational. So it's like, okay, before I go into this episode, is this guest a storyteller, a conversationalist, a fact sharer? Like, do they like parables and metaphors? I just want to make sure I'm being the best possible host. And I think what I could preferably teach myself at the beginning is to be a better host.
Do you think hosting a podcast has made you a better keynote speaker?
Definitely.
Why?
I have a joke that when you start making content, you get what I call camera-itis. So it's just a funny coping mechanism I invented, which was when the camera goes on, my brain used to go blank. Or when I would go on a stage, I would just like clam up. And, you know, in many ways, it's like hitting the gym, right? Before you go and compete in a sport. And if you hit the gym, you're just going to be stronger, faster, more adept, more agile, more, you know, responsive to things. And I think by having a guest on the pod, you're really trying to facilitate their energy. You're trying to make sure they're comfortable. You're trying to make sure they're enjoying themselves, that they're able to produce great content for themselves. And we're essentially giving good value to the audience. The more we work on that, the better I get at tuning myself to an audience, the better I get at facilitating my own energy on stage, the better I get at articulating how I pronounce things, body gestures, tone of voice, inflections. And I think that when you're constantly talking week on week and you go back and you watch the recording, as painful as that is for me to go back and watch myself, I'm like, man, I don't like my voice. I don't like my body language there. I don't like how I had resting bitch face. I don't like how I have a weird tick with like rubbing the couch. Like you just start to hyperanalyze yourself, and it might sound horrible. But by going through that process again and again and again, you just start to realize, oh, okay, I can improve this. I'm in control. I can adapt and evolve and change. And I think to apply that to being on stage in front of an audience, when I'm in front of an audience, it's just, I'm able to better tune myself to their energy. Like when we went to Germany, a very different energy in Germany versus when we went to Bolivia.
Yeah.
And that's very different to Mexico City, which is where we're going next week, which is very different to Miami. So every audience has a different energy. And I kind of now look at the audience like a guest on the episode, where the guest on the episode, I'm facilitating them. And at a live event, I'm just here to facilitate the audience and give value.
I mean, really, you're extending your network within both Australia and the world through podcasting. Do you find there's a certain level of apprehension around having conversations with people that you might not know a great deal about? Like you openly say to me that you know a great deal about sport.
Yeah.
And then having conversations with Drew Mitchell or Michael Hooper, like, is there any fear around going in, kind of going, I don't really know a great deal about their area of expertise? Like, do you get nervous in those kind of episodes?
That's a good point. Yeah, I would say when we started interviewing athletes, you know, and truly trying to respect them and their time and understand the world they come from and what it takes to be an athlete. It was, you know, and I followed like people like Michael Jordan as a kid and stuff, but I was never obsessing over the quantitative and qualitative data of sports. I kind of was like, oh, I catch it on the television at a pub or whatever. But to actually sit down with an athlete and unpack sport was difficult, because I was like, how do I talk about sport if I've never really been hyper invested into it? Business was a different thing, easy, comes natural. But also then taking it on as a challenge is something I kind of had the epiphany on like 2 weeks ago, which was like, okay, cool. Like, sports is fascinating. Like it's similar psychology to business in many aspects. But it's just like deep knowledge on like one particular role within a team on a field. And they're just repeating the same maneuvers, and they're trying to really hone in on hyper specializing in one particular thing. And I think it's honorable that people spend years of their life training for very small windows of opportunity to build a career from. And I think it's admirable what these people go through. And I think I was nervous at the beginning. And then now I'm like getting into sports. Like I've started watching football games. I started getting more into sports, and almost like a refreshed appreciation for like sports in and of itself. You know, I no longer look at it as like a bunch of guys kicking a ball around the field. It's like, oh, okay, cool. There's nuance to this. There's strategy to this. There's training. There's emotional grit and determination. Like there's so many layers to it. And I think it's opened a whole new world of things I don't know about.
I think there's also a part of the conversation, speaking to the point prior as well, around having humility around what you don't know. And like that's a huge, I think a really strong attribute and sort of characteristic that you have that I find quite admirable, is just how you're willing to kind of go, I don't know this, but I'm willing to be the student now. And you're just willing to be naturally curious. I don't think a lot of people are naturally inclined that way. I think a lot of people kind of shy away from moments where they go, I don't know this, and I don't want to be seen like being an idiot, or however you want to phrase it. I think that's something that I find quite admirable about you, is having these conversations with these individuals, or, you know, using the bookshelf and reminding yourself there's a lot that I don't know about.
Yeah, and for me, that's exciting. For some, I guess it could be terrifying to not know things. But the more I don't know, the smaller and more insignificant I feel. And that makes the world infinitely more exciting to me because I think I have an adventurous spirit, and I think the smaller I feel and the bigger the world feels, the more excited I get to continue to learn. And, I think when it comes to having humility, I think also like when you're facilitating a guest, and let's just say you share a similar interest or a similar topic, like we've had guests on the pod that do branding, and a part of your brain is like, there might be things that they're saying in my field of expertise that I disagree with, but also having the maturity to refrain from like correcting and like, getting into a debate with a guest and just allowing them to say their piece. And really trying to facilitate them as best as possible, and unless there's something inherently like terrible about what the guest is saying, we might correct them, and we have, and sometimes we edit things out, but like, we really want to, I guess, together collectively just go, hey, you're here, you're giving us your time, like, let's just hear you say your piece. And instead of challenging, it's more like, explain that to me, unpack that further. I don't understand. What about this? Have you considered these things? Like hitting questions in a way where you're challenging an idea, but not directly, not in an abrasive, disrespectful manner. It's more like I'm going to allow you to completely unpack this for me so I can try to adopt and understand the world the way you see it.
On that, then, who do you think you've learned the most from as a guest?
I'd say the most I've learned from a guest that I've actually implemented and applied personally was talking to Mark Normand about comedy.
Interesting. There was a lot of apprehension around that episode. I know we held on to that for a long time.
We almost didn't post it. And if you go back and watch the episode with Mark Normand, for those that don't know, he's a comedian in New York City, and outlandish, outrageous. There's a few things that I think happened. One, which was we were in a foreign city. So we were in New York City, which was extremely exciting. Like titillating. I was like, oh my God, like I've wanted to come here since I was a kid. So I'm buzzed because we're in New York City. And then, we used Mark Gagnon's set for his podcast, Camp Gagnon. So we're in this uncomfortable, situation where we're using someone else's pod and equipment. We're in New York City. We're meeting with a comedian who's super famous, and it was just so much stimulation. And not only that, but to add another layer to it, it's in Kids Super's retail headquarters.
Yeah.
So we have Mark Gagnon's podcast in Kids Super's store in New York City with a famous comedian. So there's just so many layers to this that I got excited about. Then we get there and we get on the pod, and he's just absolutely going ham with
from the get-go,
from the jump, like from the second he walked in, cracking jokes, just a full-blown, natural, full-time comedian. And I think when we sat down with him, I just didn't know how to talk to him.
How many hours, or not hours, sorry, how many minutes of content did you have to trim from that episode, Gabe? That we just
I think it was a 2 hour 20 episode, and it got down to an hour 20.
There's an hour of footage out there that we...
It's very unhinged.
It's unhinged, but
in the best way possible.
In the best way. He just went to town, and he was just... I think what I loved about it was he was unapologetically and unabashedly himself. And I admire that so much, for someone to be completely exposed and to truly not care and to lean all the way into what they're obsessed with. That really impacted me and affected me in a way that I can't explain, other than the fact that I would say that it almost gave me more permission just to be way more myself, to be my true, weird, authentic self. And I know the word authentic has this buzzword to it, but it almost enabled me to just be more me. And I'd ask him questions, and he would just blatantly disagree with the question, just didn't give a shit. And I think it was so fun for me to go, I don't know how to handle this conversation, but I was so happy because I'm like, oh, this is a new challenge. Next time we get a comedian like this, I'm going to be ready for this. But I was so happy that he was just himself, man. Yeah.
Can I just put out there that everything that could go wrong technically did for that episode?
Yeah.
Everything
as
that
well.
Two cameras didn't work. We had to,
But that said, it's performed as one of the best videos we've done. So for anyone thinking of doing a podcast that needs quality, essentially, we had no quality for that episode.
That is the fire alarm.
There is a fire alarm.
So,
Oh,
Oh,
well, that would have been interesting. Let's continue.
let's keep that in.
how weird.
Unexpected things happen, and you
Yeah.
just got to roll with the punches, guys. That's the point. Fire alarms can go off. You just keep the pod rolling. But yeah, I think the cameras. So we were trying to use Mark's cameras.
Yeah, the cameras failed halfway through the episode, so we lost 2 cameras. Our main camera turned off, so we had to reset it up mid-pod. You didn't know any of this was happening.
Oh, I didn't.
We were having freak
I remember
outs,
this.
but-
I remember you guys running around frantically, and I was like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were just like, keep on going. I'll sort it out. I'll be back running in and out.
But I think there was so many lessons in that episode. We were like, never again are we like ever using anyone else's equipment. We're always gonna have a backup. Like I think that one episode like taught us, okay, when you guys are on the road, we're gonna be ultra prepped.
Yeah. And we were traveling with 6 suitcases of equipment and still that. Yeah.
14 days in.
Yeah, we were like,
Yeah, we're
grossly.
pretty cooked.
But that said, it's performed outrageously and it's got so much support for that one episode. It just really shows that it's the quality of what's in the episode, not necessarily how nice it looks.
Yeah, I think that episode is like really interesting because it's like you're learning like a deep amount of information about someone's world. Like a comedian's world is weird. And it's a weird craft. It's a weird art form. It's often misunderstood. And Mark was able to like interestingly share his story whilst also being hilarious, while also cracking jokes and giving step-by-step insights on how you could do what he does. Like he just was able to just give us everything that he's doing. And he wasn't really tap dancing around questions. He was just really good at getting into the nitty gritty and just giving values, which I think taught us, okay, we can have a really entertaining episode that has a tremendous amount of value in it as well.
I think it also comes back to the ethos of the podcast, which is not gatekeeping value. Like, and that's a big part of your brand is you never really gatekeep anything. It's like, here it is. This is me, unapologetically me. This is the value that I'm trying to teach. And I think that particular episode and the guests the episodes that really go well are the episodes where there's really no gatekeeping whatsoever. It's just unapologetically value-driven episodes. But Mark's particular episode, it was done in a very entertaining way.
And on you, Dain. You didn't have a script. You didn't have questions for that episode, so you really brought it.
We were
as
raw
well.
dogging that episode. Yeah.
Because that was a very last-minute episode. Like, I think he DM'd us like an hour or two beforehand or something.
we had conflicting issues with the date.
Yeah.
And because we had to book a studio as well, which that fell through. So then we were scrambling where we
Yeah,
going to
we
film.
like called Mark last minute. We're like, hey, bro. He's like, yeah, man. Like,
Mark Gagnon.
sorry, yeah, we called Mark Gagnon and we're like, dude, like, we don't have a studio. I was like, that's cool. You can use mine. So like, shout out to Mark. And then the funny thing was like, the fans of Mark Norman's, I guess, love his content and like surf and scour the web to try to find content of him. So he has like super fans. And his super fans found the episode, and I think they started telling each other that the episode was there. I think Mark even gave us a shout out on his socials, and a whole bunch of people jumped on it. And it was like interesting because they're like, "Who the hell is this guy? Why is he on Mark Gagnon's set? And how did he get Mark Norman's?"
Yeah.
And it was just this interesting mixture of
bizarre.
like our audience colliding with their audience, and it was like Mark Gagnon's audience because they follow the same comedians in the same circles. But I think that's the beauty of podcasting. You can't predict everything. Like you literally have to just kind of roll with the punches. But like weirdly enough, like happy accidents happen. Like the footage wasn't great. We almost scrapped it. We almost felt like we weren't giving you guys the quality that we wanted. But the value was in the conversation. For you guys, what has been the biggest eye opener or opportunity that you've seen on the podcast?
Biggest eye opener is for me just how similar everyone that's taking agency in their lives are. Like, obviously, everyone's very, very different, but the amount of times I've heard the exact same things that they do in the morning, it's like 90% of the time, which to me makes me think, fuck, maybe I'm doing something wrong.
Do you think it's a mindset? Do you think it's
I
emotional?
definitely think it's mindset. I think it's the mindset of like believing their own. I'm going to use the word bullshit because everyone bullshits to themselves.
Yeah, everything's bullshit at the end of the day.
You believe in your own bullshit to
Yeah.
the point like genuinely believing it. Not like, I'm going to be rich and famous. It's like, I'm going to be rich and famous. Like, I don't care what you say.
Yeah,
That's-
they're like stubbornly delusional about what they want.
Yeah, and they're honest. They're not lying to themselves, which I feel a lot of people that are trying are lying to themselves. I'm going to do this. I'm going to work out every day. I'm going to wake up at 6 a.m. What time did you wake up? Oh, 7:30.
Yeah. Do you think so something I learned from Tony Robbins that's like one of my favorite quotes is like turn your shoulds into musts. And he has a theory that like if you're the type of personality where you're like, I should start a podcast, I should make content, I should write that book, I should try to do keynotes, I should start that business. He's like, you're gonna should all over yourself. And Tony Robbins says you need to find a way to turn your shoulds into musts. And it's like, I must start a podcast. And a must is like, it's happening. And it's almost like you're planting a flag in the ground and you're like, I'm going to make this thing happen. It's a must. It's not like, I'm not going to wake up in the morning and should brush my teeth. I'm going to wake up in the morning. I must brush my teeth. I must put my shoes on. I must wear clothes when I leave the house.
Exactly. And
Right?
I think
Non-negotiables.
people that have these musts understand it a lot more. When you're younger, starting, you don't have a lot of musts. Like, I should go to bed early, but
Yeah. I
it's
must
not a must.
eat a lot of sugar.
Yeah.
And I must scream and run around like a maniac. But then that changes in life.
It changes. And I guess the more musts you put onto your plate, the more your mentality changes into that, like, I'm going to do it. It's not waking up and like, maybe I'll do this. It's waking up and going, that's already fucking done. What's the next thing on my must list?
Yeah, and it's like conviction. It's like grit. I'm gonna do them.
Exactly. And what was the other one? How the opportunity?
Yeah, opportunity. Like maybe the biggest opportunity you've seen.
Oh, networking. 100%. Like throughout the podcast, your network has at least times by 20. And that's not just from one guest. That's one guest will give us 20 other contacts. It's people that have similar mindset. Bank accounts aside, it's just people that really want to do something, people that are pushing forward, people that want to help and give back as well.
And it's contagious in a weird way because you're like, when you see someone else pursuing greatness, you can't help but go, oh, what am I doing? You know what I mean? Like, I've heard Grant Cardone share this story where he was like, like think about it when you're a kid and you see Michael Jordan flying through the air and like slamming a ball in a hoop. You're just like, whoa, I'm witnessing greatness. And then there's a part of you that's like, I want to do something great, So when you're constantly hearing these people sharing the same, I guess, frequent traits, tropes, quirks, what have you, you're like, huh. Like it makes you start questioning what yours are. What about you, Cam? Eye openers and opportunities.
I think your health is your wealth. That was a big one for me. It seems to be a constant thing that keeps coming up. Is if you're not healthy, you're nothing really, regardless of money in the bank account and all that sort of stuff. If you're not looking after yourself, you're not really of any value to people and the people around you. I think a large part has always come back to you've got to look after yourself and make time for yourself, and that's something that's really hit home for me. Just having these conversations is how much these people prioritize looking after themselves. Like, yes, they're working like Bradley Gimbert 12, 14-hour days each day, but they're still making time for themselves, whether that be getting up at 4 a.m. to go for a run or Olivia running at midnight when there's bats around. Like these people are just in any shape or form finding time for themselves. And the other thing I think I've found that has kind of really resonated with me is a lot of these people are just winging it on the fly. A lot of these people don't really know what they're doing until they start. They're just kind of like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, none of the guests have started what made their business great with that version of it.
They've never gone in with a perfect plan.
Nah.
Well,
They've
let's
just
think-
kind of gone, fuck it, I'm just going to start and see what happens.
Let me ask this question. Has anyone from memory came on and said I was this good because I got a degree or because I went to university or college.
Nope.
I can't remember a single guest that...
No, even the academics were like, I had to go out on the field and do some shit.
Exactly.
Like even Marcus Collins, when we had him on the pod and that episode's not out yet, you know, he is extraordinarily academic, like has multiple PhDs and doctrines, teaches at a university, and was still like, I got out on the street and I hustled and I learned how to do business the OG way. And then I've applied that to my academia. And it's like, I took the streets and academia and put them together, and that's me. And I think, you know, someone like his stature, he's worked with Beyonce, he's worked with Jay-Z, he's worked with Apple, he's worked with the NBA. And he's like, yeah, like I've got all these doctrines, but like still you got to go out there in the real world. And there's in many aspects more value in the real, I guess, let's figure it out as we go method than academia can teach.
I've kind of reskinned the conclusion question slightly to make them a bit more reflective, but how do you want the podcast to be remembered?
That's a great question, man. I haven't thought about this. It'd be interesting to come back and see if my answer changes.
Yeah,
let's do this again at 100.
100. And
Okay.
like, we'll pull it up and we'll do a little montage for the thing, you know?
Yeah. If I really think about this, I'd like to garner a reputation and a legacy to have been wildly creative and ruthlessly commercial and obsessively curious.
Final question. What's your big, hairy goal for the podcast?
My big, hairy goal for the podcast is to have it in a position where it is influencing the culture around business. I want the podcast to be so substantial that it can reach people and make a substantial dent in how we psychologically think about business on a fundamental level, and to be a challenger of ideas.
Love it.
So if you're thinking about doing a podcast, just fucking do it. Believe in yourself, run at the camera despite your camera-itis, and just find a way to speed run networking. It's super fun and it's extremely rewarding.
You'll be surprised who will say yes. As I always say, the answer is always no until you ask the question. So always ask people if they're willing to do it, because you'll be surprised who will say yes.
Yeah, we have been super surprised.
Correct.
I think the biggest surprise was when I was like, yo, Bedros, want to come on the pod? He's like, sure. I was like, huh. Okay. So now I'm like getting really ballsy. I DM'd LL Cool J and I was like, yo, dude, want to come on the pod? And he saw it. And I was like, yes.
First,
you know what
first
I mean?
foot in.
Like just like he'd seen the message and I was like, hell yeah, dude. LL Cool J has seen an invite. He didn't respond, but that's cool. That's cool.
That's all right. That's
no beef. No beef, LL, if you're watching. Not that you are. But I think
maybe you'll check it out.
Well, I think we got a little bit more ballsy, right? We just started going, like let's just when we got a few of them.
Once you get the first one, you're like, oh, I can ask other people these kind of questions.
Maybe I can hit this guy up.
Yeah. One day we'll get Russell Crowe on. I know that's
guys. If anyone knows Russell Crowe, he once knocked out my stepdad in a bar, and I want to ask him about it. Dead serious.
That's our mission within the next 50 is to get Rusty on.
Yeah, I think in conclusion, guys, it's been a ton of fun, and I'm excited to really kick the door in and try to get this thing at another pedigree.
I'm keen to see where the next 50 take us.
Oh yeah.
See you at 100.
See you at 100.
Yo, my name's Dain Walker and I am disgustingly obsessed with branding. I had to figure out a way to do branding every single day, so I branded myself. Then I started my agency, RIVYL. And hired a team of branding mavericks hell-bent on creating brands so good that they'll make your competition shit their pants. So here's the thing, you want your brand to go viral and RIVYL makes brands go viral. That's why we're offering you a free 30-minute branding session to get an expert's opinion. If you don't believe me, the proof is in the pudding. Here's what clients have to say about RIVYL.
RIVYL is trusted by brands like Nutrition Warehouse, Light My Bricks, and Vumi.
So if you want to absolutely smoke the competition and make your brand go viral, hit the link below and book in your free 30-minute branding session.